We've talked about hacking. Now let's talk about ethical hacking. That's what we do. So what's the difference? In ethical hacking, we're there to help, not hurt. We're there to use hacking to improve security. We'll try to identify the vulnerabilities before the bad guy gets to it. We'll use the same tools, the same techniques as all the other hackers, but we're there to protect, not to damage. Now, why is it necessary? Well, we gotta keep ahead of the bad guys, right? We want to fix things, uncover and fix things before the bad actor can exploit them. We'll analyze and strengthen an organization's security posture. We're going to try to discover what can an intruder see or do. Have any intrusions already actually occurred? Are the systems properly patched, properly protected? What amount of effort would be necessary to actually protect these systems? And any measures that have been put in place, are they in compliance with industry or legal requirements and standards? So what's the difference between ethical hacking and a pen test? There's a whole lot of overlap, but here's the key difference. Ethical hacking is the mechanism of a penetration test. The ethical hacker is part of the pen test team. In a pen test, an organization will formally engage a team of experts. Okay, we've got a charter, we've got limits, we've got rules of engagement, we've got all these things. We're going to give a deliverable of a report at all these levels. In a pen test, we will actively attempt to exploit systems and infrastructure and people, if that's part of it. We don't want to confuse either ethical hacking or hacking and penetration test with vulnerability scan. You see, a vulnerability scan, for the most part, is just an automated scan to see what potential vulnerabilities exist. They might be vulnerable to hacking. It's not that we've already exploited them, it's just maybe this is a weakness. The reality of vulnerability scans is that these tools, in trying to prove their worth to you, they'll come up with all of these vulnerabilities, and only a few of them will be really something you could exploit. So a vulnerability scan, that would be like one of the first things you do in a pen test. Let's scan for vulnerabilities and then see which ones work. As an ethical hacker, you'll need technical skills. You'll need to understand in depth the operating systems and the concepts and the technologies, the hardware and the software that you are going to be attacking. You should understand various technical domains. You should be a computer expert. You should be comfortable using the same tools and exploits that other hackers will use. You should have knowledge of security and experience in implementing security. You should understand sophisticated attacks, not just be a script kiddie. You'll also need some non-technical skills. First and foremost, you need some people skills, because some of your hacking will include social engineering. In addition to that, you need to be able to learn and adapt to new technologies very quickly. You should have a strong work ethic and be committed to the organization's security and their policies. You're not there just to go blowing things up and having fun. You're there to help them ultimately. You need to also have some understanding of local and state and federal laws and organizational compliance. Now, I am not saying you're a lawyer. You might work with the client's legal team to explain to them certain vulnerabilities, weaknesses, things you're doing, so that they can understand why this vulnerability occurs, and then they can relate that to compliance or relate that to some kind of requirement. You should be able to communicate concisely with the client. Explain also that systems can never be fully secured. You want a secure system? You want a 100% secure system? Don't have a system. That's the bottom line. It's like Border Patrol. You can reach a certain level of what's acceptable. At some point, it's just not worth the money anymore. So you need to explain, and you need to get the client to understand that, hey, we can never be 100% secure. Security can always be improved. Once we discover the vulnerabilities and explain what you should do to shore them up, it's up to you, the organization, to actually implement the recommendations. And also, there will always be new vulnerabilities, new exploits that no one's ever thought about for the same technology or product. The ethical hacking process kind of goes like this. The client hires you, the pen test team, to find vulnerabilities in their network. There will be rules of engagement. When will you start? What systems will you test, not test? Will you include non-technical things like processes and people, social engineering? There are different testing types, and you need to know this too. The white box test is something that an internal team would probably do. You have complete visibility into the system. You already know all the operating systems, all the services, the devices on the network. You know everything. This lets you be more thorough. You don't have to discover anything. The only problem with this kind of testing is that if you're already really familiar with the system, you're probably going to overlook stuff. You won't think creatively. You won't think out of the box. Gray box is where a tester has some visibility into the system they're testing. And black box is you have no visibility into the system. You come at it blind, like a real hacker from the outside. This most closely resembles a real attack. And third parties that are doing a security audit on your system are going to do this. It will require you to really think outside the box and be creative. Now, what happens if you discover sensitive information? So during the pen test, during the hacking, you come across some really sensitive information, like an entire list of usernames and passwords, or somebody's personally identifiable information or personal health information, or some user's bank account and logon information. You need to stop and you need to notify your client's system administrator because you don't want to prevent any possible future damage. Let them deal with it. What if you discover illegal activity? And I have certainly had that happen in my case. You're doing something, and during a routine assessment, you discover that the client is engaged in fraudulent or illegal activity. Your first duty always is to upholding the law. In this case, what you discover supersedes any loyalty you have to the customer. You immediately stop work. And by the way, you let your team lead, your supervisor know. And if it's you contact the proper authorities first. Then you can decide whether or not to show your findings to the client's upper management. But you have to be careful about showing the client what you discovered because they might try to dispose of the evidence. Depends on what it is and how bad it is. Remember, your first duty as an ethical hacker is to uphold the law. What if you discover evidence of an actual intrusion? You're doing some pen testing, you go, whoa, somebody already hacked into this thing. So you're conducting your pen test, you might discover real evidence of a real hack or compromise. Like, wow, I see that there's active malware or Trojans or botnets or compromised machines. I see that data has been leaking out. I see unexpected connections to the internet, or there's a production server with some of its log files deleted, and that shouldn't have happened. Or there's a workstation that's internal that's scanning the rest of the network, or there's network traffic that just does not make sense. Stop what you're doing, notify the client's trusted point of contact for guidance. The company's, your customer's security team should investigate before you continue with your engagement. For using hacker tools, you're going to have to learn the same tools and methods that a black hat would use. You can't be effective if you don't know how to do this. These tools will always carry an element of risk. It's very possible, and any sysadmin who's been around even for a little while will tell you that there will be so-called fragile systems that an exploit could really damage. So you've got to just be cognizant of this. And that's why sometimes in the rules of engagement, there's an agreement, don't touch those particular ones, because if they go down, we're in trouble. So you're going to have to keep these risks in mind. You want to avoid the fragile systems. Your customer is going to have to point them out to you. You want to do any test that might be disruptive during a time or in a place where they're going to have the least negative impact. You'll want to coordinate closely with your client's counterparts to make sure there's a disaster recovery plan in place. So in case there's an accident, stop, contact them and say, hey, we blew something up, and give them a chance, work with them to restore the thing that you inadvertently damaged. Just realize that that can happen, and you want to be on top of it right away and just immediately contact them and say, hey, something happened here, we're stopping here, and we want to let you guys know. This is what we were doing, this is what happened. For developing your ethical hacking skills, you should set up a practice lab, which is, of course, what we have in this class. keep the lab, obviously, away from a production environment. And install different operating systems. Use the different tools that hackers use. There are a whole bunch of pre-configured targets that you can download for free to practice on. There's DVWA, Matildae, Metasploitable 1, 2, or 3. We're using Metasploitable 2 in our activities. OWASP has a whole web testing environment and WebGoat, and also something for iOS called iGoat. They also have something for Android called CrackMe's. There's the Buggy Web app, BWAP, that comes in a whole virtual machine called the BBox. We use that. There's Chioptrix. It has levels 1 through 4, 4 different VMs. And you can go to VulnHub and download all sorts of pre-configured VMs to practice on. These are just the most popular ones, the most well-known ones. One of the best ways to practice is in a virtualized practice environment. You get a good computer and you run several guest operating systems inside of it, rather than having to have multiple physical boxes. Now, in some cases, you might want physical boxes because some of the activities that you want to do are physical in nature. But in most cases, when you're just working with software, you can use VMs. So virtual machine is a whole OS that runs as an app in your lab machine. It's not a simulation, and it's standard practice in any corporate data center. The VMs, they have their own IP address, their own network interface, their own MAC address, CPU, RAM, disk, operating system, applications, etc. And on the network, the VM looks like any other host. The VMs will borrow functionality from the physical hardware, but they're kept separate. So they have what's called a hypervisor. It's a layer. In Windows, that hypervisor is actually a DLL. And it sits between the hardware and then the virtualization product, which have all the little VMs. Some common virtualization products, VMware, that's what we're using, VirtualBox by Oracle, Hyper-V by Microsoft, BlueStacks, and Genymotion for if you're virtualizing and pretending to have phones when you don't really, or iPadia. Here's an example right here. So I'm sitting at a pretty powerful pretty powerful host machine. Got a lot of hardware, like 16, 32, 64 gigs of RAM, lots of disk space, good i7, i9 CPU. And here on my host, I have actual hardware. I've got the host operating system. I've got the hypervisor, which keeps the virtual machines away from the host OS. You can also get really thin and use virtualized containers. Now, a container is just a VM for only one app. It's not a whole operating system. It's just a few files to run one app only. And it's this little tiny VM, so it's very lightweight. And there are a number of popular products. You've probably heard of Docker and Kubernetes at the very least. There are risks to virtualization. I mean, virtualization was developed when there was a study done, and the average server in a server room was only being utilized about 17%, and yet it was burning electricity, taking up floor space, etc. So the idea was, can't we just consolidate these? Now, in some cases, you can't run multiple apps on the same computer. They just don't play nice, or the security differences, whatever. But maybe we could run whole operating systems as an app and have a bunch of these so that we're utilizing the computer 70 or 80% rather than 17%. Like, I know a Fortune 10 company, I did some consulting for them. These folks, they saved 1 million square feet in data center floor space for all of their data centers around the world total. 1 million square feet when they went to virtualization and got rid of all those excess boxes, and they saved a ton of money in terms of electricity as well. But you have to be really careful, and this is true even in your lab environment, because a virtual machine, if you don't configure it right, can starve the host. It can take too much CPU and RAM. So you got to be careful about how many resources, how much CPU, how much RAM, how much disk you're going to configure a VM or a container to have. You might also consider disallowing the VM from interacting directly with the host or the outside network. And remember, a VM, this environment is an imperfect sandbox. Most implementations assume that the VM will interact with the host and the outside network. You're going to have to configure how much isolation you want, and there is always a risk that some malicious app running in a VM can bust out of the VM, can escape the sandbox and attack other VMs, like other customers, and the host itself. So these are the risks of virtualization. In your lab, your biggest risk is that you give a VM too much CPU or RAM, and not enough to the others, not enough to the host. When we're talking containers, Docker, Kubernetes, there's even a greater risk to the host because the container will directly use the host OS and hardware. And it too might consume too many host resources and starve the host from CPU, RAM, or disk space. So this is ethical hacking. What we have to do, what we need to know, how we do it, and how we can gain our skills. And now, on to the next topic.